Hello everyone, my name is Ektorakos and this is the Peaky Boardgamer's channel. By the end of today's video, you will learn how to play the game Cóatl. Cóatl is a puzzle abstract game for 1 to 4 players, which plays in about an hour. This game was designed by Pascale, Brassard and Etienne Dubois and was produced by Synapses games. Let's move to the table and see how the game is played. In the game, players are trying to impress the Aztec gods by carving the most elegant Coatl sculptures. During the game, players will be gaining sculpture components from the supply board, as well as prophecy cards that will add value to these sculptures. With a specific action, players construct their Coatls using components in their possession. When doing so, they may also attach one or more of their prophecy cards that will boost the Coatl's score in scoring. The game ends as soon as a player completes their third Cóatl or when there are no more body segments remaining in the supply. In scoring, players tally up the score for each one of their Cóatls, and the player with the most victory points wins the game and becomes the new Aztec High Priest in Cóatl. At first, place the supply board in the middle of the table using this side facing upwards. Then you must set up your Cóatl bags. There are 3 types of Cóatl body components. We have heads, tails and body segments. Place all the components into their corresponding bag, give them a shuffle and place them next to the supply board. Now you can replenish the areas on the supply board by drawing random components from the bags. There are 2 areas that hold a head segment, 2 areas for a tail segment, and 6 areas holding a pair of body segments each. Then players take a personal board and the 3 sacrifice tokens of the corresponding color. Players place these tokens facing upwards in front of their play area. Select the first player at random and give that player the first player token. This player will take the first turn and order will proceed clockwise. Next, take the 15 temple cards, shuffle them and randomly give 1 card to each player. The remaining temple cards should be split to 2 equal piles and then place these piles facing upwards next to the supply board. These here are prophecy cards. After you shuffle them, create a face-down stack next to the supply board. Then take the 6 cards from the top of the stack and place them beneath the stack, creating a face-up prophecy supply. Then the first player takes 3 random prophecy cards from the top of the stack. Each next player takes 1 prophecy card more than the previous one. So the second player will take 4 cards, the third player would take 5 cards and the fourth player 6. After each player examines their own prophecy cards, all players will have to select and keep only 3 of them, so the second player would have to select 1 card, which should be discarded. Players keep their cards secret from their opponents. The game is now ready to start. This is the point I'm asking you to subscribe to this channel if you like our videos and want to support the effort behind them. You can also hit that bell button so you get notified of any of our future videos. In the game, players alternate turns in a clockwise manner, starting with the first player. This continues indefinitely until one of the game's end conditions is triggered. On their turn, players perform one of 3 different actions. With the first one, they can take new body components and place them on their personal board. With the second action, players gain new prophecy cards to add to their hand. With the third action, players use body components from their board in order to construct their Coatls. Also, instead of performing one of these 3 actions, players can use one of their sacrifice tokens for its effect and then discard it. Now let's explain the 3 main actions as well as the sacrifice token effects in greater detail. With the first action, players take Cóatl pieces from the supply board and place them on vacant spaces of their personal board. The player's personal board can hold up to 8 body components. When performing this action, you can either take 1 head part or 1 tail part, or choose one of the 6 body part pairs and take both of the parts. Very important, in order to take parts from the supply board, you must have enough available spaces for all the acquired parts. So in this example, if I chose to perform the take Cóatl pieces, I would only be able to take either a head or a tail, but no body parts at all. Of course, you cannot willingly discard segments from your board in order to make space to take more. At the end of the player's action, the supply board will be replenished only on two conditions. You replenish the supply board when there is no head and tail remaining. So in such a case, you would replenish the supply board using random components from the corresponding bags. The second condition is when there are no body segments remaining on the board. Again, you replenish the board by using random components from the corresponding bag. Back to our previous example, the supply board will not be replenished, and play proceeds with the next player. With the next action, the player chooses prophecy cards from the face-up supply and adds them to their hand. A player can choose any number of cards from the middle of the table, but they can never exceed their limit, which is 5 prophecy cards. In addition to that, a player can never willingly discard their cards in order to make space for more new cards. These cards have to be used while assembling your Cóatl with the action we will explain just in a bit. At the end of the player's turn, the face-up supply is replenished by drawing new cards from the top of the draw deck. The most important action of the game is to assemble your Cóatl. With this action, the player uses any number of components from their personal board to construct their 3 Cóatls. Players are not required to have a full personal board in order to perform this action, and when they perform this action, they don't have to use all of their components on the personal board. They can leave some components on the board to be used in a future Assemble Your Cóatl action. Imagine that players have 3 virtual areas, one for each of their Cóatls. Players can use their components to add to their existing Cóatls or to start new ones, but they can never add more components to completed Cóatls. To complete a Cóatl, you need a head on the left, a tail on the right, and at least one body segment in the middle. Very important, you can never have more than 2 incomplete Cóatls at the same time. So in order to start my 3rd Cóatl, I must first complete one of the 2 Cóatls that currently are under construction. So let's say in our example I use these components to enlarge my Cóatls. After components are placed on the Cóatl, they cannot be removed and you cannot rotate your Cóatls. When performing this action, in addition to adding components in your Cóatls, you can also play any number of your prophecy cards. You play prophecy cards by attaching them to one of your incomplete Cóatls. However, in order to do so, the attached Cóatl must satisfy the requirement depicted at the bottom of the card at least the number of times indicated in the top box in the top left corner. The requirement of this card is to connect yellow and black components, having the yellow component on the left and the black one on the right. The card depicts body components, but these can also be either a tail or a head. In our example, I satisfy the requirement not only once, but twice. So I can play this card, which actually worths 3 victory points. However, these victory points will not be awarded now. They will be awarded at the end of the game. So if until then I manage to create a 3rd pair, I will gain the maximum 5 victory points. As I said, you can play any number of applicable cards with a single action. However, a single Cóatl can never have more than 4 prophecy cards attached to it. You should also note that the specific component can be used only once for each card, but can be used again for other cards. The last page of the rulebook explains all different types of requirements seen on prophecy cards. However, we will see some of them in the scoring explanation. As I said, to complete a Cóatl, you need a head on the left, a tail on the right, and at least one body part in the middle, so I could place this here and complete my Cóatl. On top of this requirement, you are also required to have played at least one prophecy card attached in that Cóatl. So since I have played 2 cards in this Cóatl, I have no problem completing it. But if I didn't, then I would have to play one applicable card now in the same action that I complete the Cóatl. When you complete one of your Cóatls, you can also attach 1 temple cards either from your hand or from the top of the supply stacks. Every temple card depicts 2 requirements in the bottom part. In order to attach the temple card into your Cóatl, at least one of them must be satisfied in the just completed Cóatl. This temple card requires that the completed Cóatl has no black segments at all and that it consists of exactly 8 segments. Unfortunately, none of these requirements is satisfied, so this card cannot be played. However, the completed Cóatl satisfies the top requirement of this temple card, which is the Cóatl to have the same number of yellow and green components. The top left corner of the card indicates that I will gain 3 victory points for having satisfied one of the 2 requirements and 7 victory points if you manage to satisfy both of the requirements. Now let's explain the effects of sacrifice tokens. When a player spends this token, they perform a perfect pick action. Think of it as an improved version of taking Cóatl pieces. Again, the player takes either a head or a tail or 2 body segments. But instead of taking the components from the supply board, the player selects the preferred components from the corresponding bag. After taking the components, the player must also replenish the supply board, even if it's not currently in one of the 2 explained conditions that would allow replenishment. Then the player discards the sacrifice token. By spending this sacrifice token, the player can see the future, which is an improved version of choosing prophecy cards. First, the player discards all cards from the face-up supply, which is then replenished from the draw deck. Then the player is allowed to discard any number of cards from their hand, which is not normally allowed. Then the player performs the choose prophecy cards action as normal, and the sacrifice token is discarded. By spending this token, the player performs a priest commitment action. With this action, the player selects one of the 2 face-up temple cards from the middle of the table and adds it to their hand. Then the player discards the sacrifice token. There are 2 conditions that can trigger the end of the game. The first one is when a player completes their 3rd Cóatl. When that's the case, the game continues and all other players will take a final turn. All players that play after the player that triggered the end will perform 2 consecutive actions in their final turn. In the contrary, all players that play before the player that triggered the end will perform a normal turn with 1 action only. In our example, the red player, who is second in the player's turn order, has just completed their 3rd Cóatl. Now the green player will perform their final turn, performing 2 actions, and then the yellow player will perform 1 action in their final turn, and then game proceeds to scoring. The second endgame trigger is when there are no body parts remaining on the supply board and the body components bag is completely empty. When this happens, the game continues until all players have had equal number of turns in the game. So now the green player who plays last will take their final turn and then the game ends and you proceed to scoring. In scoring, you get rid of all components on the supply board and you flip it over. Then, all players take a body part of their own color and place it on space 0 of the scoring track in order to track their score. In scoring, players score victory points for their completed Cóatls only. This score is determined by prophecy and temple cards attached to the specific Cóatl. As an example, I will analyze scoring of this Cóatl. The first prophecy card requires a specific pattern of segments to be created in the Cóatl. As you can see, the yellow player has managed to create this pattern twice, one here and one there. Unfortunately, this prophecy card can only be scored once and grants the player 4 victory points. The next prophecy card requires 2 blue connected segments. The segments connected to this blue segment pair must either be of another color or not exist at all. The yellow player again managed to do this pattern twice in the Cóatl, once here and once there. So this prophecy card grants the player 5 victory points. The next prophecy card requires 2 blue segments that have any number of green-only segments between them. The player has managed to do this once here and will gain 2 victory points. However, if the player managed to do this twice, they would gain 6 victory points. Finally, the temple card requires that the Cóatl has the same number of yellow and blue pieces, which is not the case. However, the second requirement is that the Coatl consists of exactly 12 segments, which is true, and since one of the two requirements was satisfied, the player will gain 3 victory points from this temple card. So the total score of this Coatl is 14 victory points. Now the player will score the rest of their completed Coatls. After scoring, the player with the most victory points wins the game. If there is a tie, then the tied player who has attached the most cards in their completed Coatls will win the tie. If the tie still exists, then the tied player with the most valuable Coatl in terms of victory points will win the tie. And that was the very colorful Cóatl. Again, if you like our videos and want to see more videos like that, please subscribe to our channel, and until next time, have fun and play more board games.